Castiel Morado had always believed that marriage was about growing together, not growing apart in the same house. But as he stood in his own kitchen at midnight, staring at his wife Elena through the dim light filtering from the hallway, he realized that somewhere along the way, they had become roommates who happened to share a last name. She was sitting at the breakfast bar, laptop open, fingers dancing across the keys with the same intensity she used to reserve for their conversations. The blue glow painted her face in an almost ethereal light, making her look like a stranger he had accidentally married. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The question had been building in his chest for weeks, maybe months. It started as a whisper during those long evenings when she would curl up on the opposite end of the couch, physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. It grew louder during the dinners where her phone commanded more attention than his attempts at conversation. Tonight, watching her work past midnight on what she called her personal project, the question finally demanded an answer. "Elena," Castiel said, his voice cutting through the soft hum of her typing. She looked up, eyebrows raised in that way that suggested he was interrupting something far more important than their marriage. "We need to talk." She glanced at the clock on her laptop screen and sighed. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm in the middle of something crucial." "Everything's crucial except us," he replied, moving closer to the breakfast bar. "When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time we did anything together that didn't involve coordinating schedules or discussing bills?" Elena closed her laptop with deliberate slowness, the kind of patience you show a child who's asking too many questions. "Castiel, we're not teenagers anymore. We don't need to be attached at the hip. I have my interests, you have yours. That's called being mature adults." "That's called being strangers," he countered. "I miss my wife. I miss the woman who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal fries off my plate. I miss the person who used to ask about my day because she actually wanted to know the answer." She leaned back against the bar stool, arms crossed in that defensive posture that had become her default position whenever he tried to bridge the gap between them. "I'm still here, Castiel. I'm still the same person. Maybe you're the one who's changed. Maybe you're expecting too much." Expecting too much? The words hit him like a physical blow. "I'm expecting my wife to act like she wants to be married to me. Is that really asking for the moon?" "I'm saving myself," Elena said quietly, her eyes fixed on the granite countertop. "I'm focusing on my own growth, my own goals. I can't pour all my energy into being the wife you remember. That version of me was exhausting." Castiel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Saving yourself for what, Elena? Another marriage? The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's eyes snapped up to meet his, and for a moment he saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition that he had finally asked the question that had been hovering between them like smoke. "That's not what I meant," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already checked out of this marriage. You're here physically, but mentally, emotionally, you're somewhere else entirely. So tell me, what exactly are you saving yourself for?" The conversation that started in their kitchen didn't end there. It followed them to bed, where they lay on opposite sides of their king-sized mattress like two islands in an ocean of unspoken resentment. It followed them through the next morning's coffee routine, where Elena's silence spoke louder than any argument. And it followed Castiel to work, where he found himself staring at blueprints without really seeing them, his mind replaying Elena's words on an endless loop. Castiel worked as a structural engineer for Rivera Construction, a mid-sized firm that specialized in commercial buildings. His office was a corner space with windows that overlooked the bustling downtown area of San Miguel, their city of nearly 300,000 people. On most days, he loved the view. The constant movement of people and cars reminded him that life was happening all around him, that the world was full of energy and possibility. Today, the view just made him feel more isolated. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," said Marcus Chen, Castiel's project partner and closest friend at the firm. Marcus had worked alongside Castiel for nearly 8 years, and he possessed that rare ability to read people's moods with surgical precision. He settled into the chair across from Castiel's desk, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands and concern written across his features. "Elena and I had a fight last night," Castiel said, leaning back in his chair. "Actually, calling it a fight might be generous. It was more like me talking to a wall that occasionally talked back." Marcus nodded knowingly. He had been through his own divorce 3 years earlier, a painful but ultimately liberating experience that had taught him more about relationships than his 15-year marriage ever had. What was the topic this time? "She said she's saving herself. When I asked what for, she couldn't give me a straight answer." Castiel rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache forming. "Marcus, I feel like I'm married to a ghost. She's there, but she's not really there. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Marcus replied. "I lived that exact scenario for the last 3 years of my marriage. Sarah was physically present but emotionally AWOL. It's like being married to a beautiful photograph of the person you fell in love with. How do you know when it's worth fighting for versus when it's time to let go?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the construction site across the street where workers were laying the foundation for a new office building. You fight for it when both people are willing to show up to the fight. If only one person is swinging, you're not having a battle, you're having a breakdown. That afternoon, Castiel decided to make one more genuine attempt at connection. He stopped by Elena's favorite bakery, Casa Dulce, and picked up a box of the almond croissants she loved. He also grabbed a bottle of wine from the shop next door, the same Malbec they had shared on their first anniversary. If Elena was saving herself, maybe he could remind her what she was potentially saving herself from. Elena worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup called InnovateSphere. Her job involved managing social media campaigns and coordinating events, work that seemed to energize her in ways that their marriage no longer did. She often came home buzzing with excitement about new projects or successful campaigns, a stark contrast to the subdued version of herself she became whenever the conversation turned to their relationship. When Castiel arrived at her office, he found Elena in the conference room, surrounded by her coworkers as they brainstormed ideas for an upcoming product launch. Through the glass walls, he could see her animated gestures, her bright smile, the way she leaned forward with genuine engagement. It was like watching a different person entirely, someone who resembled her wife but possessed an energy he hadn't seen directed toward him in months. Elena spotted him through the glass and excused herself from the meeting. She met him in the reception area, her professional smile firmly in place. "This is a surprise," she said, glancing at the bakery box in his hands. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just thought we could have dinner together tonight. Actually eat at the same time, maybe even talk to each other instead of our phones." Elena checked her watch, a gesture that Castiel had learned to interpret as her mentally calculating whether he was worth the time investment. "You suppose?" The words came out flatter than he intended. "Elena, when did having dinner with your husband become something you have to fit into your schedule like a dentist appointment? That's not fair, Castiel. You know how demanding my job is right now." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. We're launching 3 new products this quarter, and I can't just turn off my commitment to my career because you decided you want to play house tonight. Play house? Castiel felt that familiar, cold sensation in his chest, the one that had become his body's automatic response to Elena's casual dismissal of their relationship. "I'm not asking you to quit your job, Elena. I'm asking you to remember that you have a husband who misses spending time with you." Elena glanced back toward the conference room, where her coworkers were still engaged in animated discussion. "Can we talk about this at home? People are watching." "Right. God forbid anyone see you having an actual conversation with your husband." The drive home was conducted in that particular type of silence that married couples perfect over time, the kind where every unspoken word carries the weight of 1,000 previous arguments. Elena stared out the passenger window while Castiel navigated the familiar streets of their neighborhood, Colinas Verdes, a planned community with tree-lined streets and houses that all looked like variations on the same theme. Their house was a 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage and a backyard that Elena had once dreamed of turning into a garden sanctuary. The garden project, like so many of Elena's enthusiasms, had lasted about 6 months before being abandoned in favor of newer interests. Now the backyard was just an expanse of grass that Castiel maintained because someone had to. Elena headed straight for her home office as soon as they walked through the door, claiming she needed to prepare for her 7 o'clock call. Castiel found himself alone in the kitchen, unpacking almond croissants that suddenly seemed like artifacts from a different marriage, evidence of a time when small gestures meant something. He decided to cook dinner anyway. Elena's favorite meal was herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, a dish he had perfected during the early years of their marriage when cooking together had been one of their favorite shared activities. As he seasoned the fish and chopped vegetables, Castiel tried to remember the last time they had cooked together. The memory felt like trying to grasp smoke. At exactly 6:30, Elena emerged from her office, laptop in hand, and settled at the dining room table. She had changed into comfortable clothes, but her posture remained rigid, professional. Even in her own home, she seemed to be attending a meeting rather than sharing a meal with her husband. "This looks wonderful," she said, glancing at the plate he set before her. "Thank you for going to the trouble." "It's not trouble, Elena. It's dinner. It's what married people do." "I didn't mean it that way." Elena took a small bite of salmon, chewing thoughtfully. "I do appreciate it. I know I've been distracted lately." Distracted seems like an understatement. Elena, talk to me. What's really going on? And please don't tell me you're just focused on work. There's something else happening here. Elena set down her fork and looked directly at him for the first time all evening. "I've been thinking about what I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years. And I realized I've spent so much of my energy being half of a couple that I've lost track of who I am as an individual." "So you decided to find yourself by pushing me away?" "I decided to find myself by stop being dependent on someone else for my happiness." "Castiel, for the first 4 years of our marriage, I was obsessed with being the perfect wife. I changed my interests to match yours. I made your friends my friends. I even changed my career path because you suggested marketing would be more stable than graphic design. Maybe you didn't ask directly, but you had opinions, strong ones. And I cared so much about making you happy that I molded myself into the shape of those opinions. Now, I'm trying to remember what my own shape looks like. And you can't do that while being married to me?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, pushing vegetables around her plate without eating them. "I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe being married to anyone. Maybe I need to be completely alone to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's perfect partner." The words hung between them like a bridge that had just been burned. Castiel felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a kind of resignation that he had been fighting against for months finally settling into place. "So, when you say you're saving yourself, you mean you're saving yourself from this marriage?" "I mean, I'm saving myself from disappearing completely into someone else's idea of who I should be, even if that someone is you, even if your ideas are good ones." Castiel stood up from the table, his appetite completely gone. "Elena, I never wanted you to disappear. I wanted you to be happy. If being happy means not being married to me, then I guess that's something we need to face." "Castiel, wait." Elena reached for his hand as he started to clear the plates. "I'm not saying I want a divorce. I'm saying I need space to figure things out. Can't we find a way to give each other some breathing room without blowing up our entire lives?" "What does that look like exactly? We're already living like roommates. How much more space do you need?" "I don't know yet. Maybe I could stay with my sister for a while. Maybe we could try a trial separation. Maybe we could just agree to lower the pressure on each other and see what happens." Castiel looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing Elena's face. The woman he had married would never have suggested a trial separation as casually as she might suggest trying a new restaurant. The woman he had married would have fought for their relationship instead of strategically retreating from it. "You know what, Elena? Take all the space you need. Take all the time you need. Save yourself from whatever it is you think you need saving from. But don't expect me to wait around indefinitely while you figure out whether being married to me is something you can tolerate. That's not fair." Fair would have been having this conversation 2 years ago when you first started checking out of our marriage. Fair would have been working together to solve our problems, instead of you making unilateral decisions about your level of emotional investment. Fair would have been you treating our relationship like something worth saving, instead of something you need to save yourself from. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but Castiel found that the sight didn't move him the way it once would have. He had spent too much months trying to decode her moods, trying to fix problems she wouldn't clearly articulate, trying to love someone who seemed determined to remain at arm's length. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we can talk about what a trial separation actually looks like. But, Elena, understand this. I'm not going to spend the next year of my life auditioning for the role of your husband. Either you want to be married to me, or you don't. But you need to decide, and you need to decide soon." That night, lying in the guest room bed that had become far too familiar over the past few months, Castiel stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when he had stopped feeling like a husband and started feeling like an inconvenience. The answer, he realized, was gradual enough that he had missed the transition entirely. Like watching the sunset, the change had been so slow that he hadn't noticed the darkness until it was complete. Elena's words echoed in his mind. "I'm saving myself." From what, exactly? From love? From commitment? From the daily work of building a life with another person? Castiel understood the desire for personal growth, for maintaining individual identity within a marriage. What he couldn't understand was Elena's apparent belief that those things were incompatible with being genuinely connected to her husband. The next morning brought a sense of clarity that surprised him. Castiel woke early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down exactly what he wanted from his marriage and what he was willing to give. The list was shorter than he expected, but more honest than any conversation he and Elena had shared in months. What he wanted: a partner who chose him daily, not someone who tolerated him. Someone who brought energy to their relationship instead of conserving it for other priorities. A wife who saw their marriage as something to nurture, not something to manage or escape from. What he was willing to give: the same things he wanted to receive. Complete emotional presence. Daily choice to prioritize their relationship. Energy invested in building something together rather than maintaining separate lives that occasionally intersected. What he wasn't willing to accept anymore: being treated like an optional part of Elena's life. Being asked to lower his expectations instead of Elena raising her investment. Living in a marriage where love felt like a burden rather than a gift. When Elena emerged from their bedroom an hour later, Castiel was ready for the conversation that would determine the direction of their future. She looked tired, older somehow, as if the previous night's discussion had aged her in ways that sleep couldn't remedy. "I've been thinking," she said, pouring herself coffee and settling across from him at the table. "Maybe a trial separation is exactly what we need, a few months apart to gain some perspective." "Elena, before you continue, I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in a trial separation that's really just a slow-motion divorce. If you need space to figure out whether you want to be married to me, then take it. But don't expect me to put my life on hold while you explore your options." What does that mean? It means that if you move out, you're choosing to end our marriage. Maybe not legally, not immediately, but practically. I won't be here waiting for you to decide whether I'm worth coming back to. Elena stared at him, clearly surprised by his directness. "Castiel, that's not what I'm asking for." "Then what are you asking for? Because from where I sit, it sounds like you want the safety net of marriage without any of the actual commitment. You want to know that I'll be here if you decide you want me, but you don't want to actually be here yourself." "I want time to remember who I am when I'm not constantly worried about whether I'm being a good enough wife." "Elena, the fact that you see being a good wife as something that requires you to lose yourself tells me everything I need to know about how you view our marriage. A good marriage should make you more yourself, not less. If ours doesn't do that, then maybe we really aren't right for each other." The conversation continued for another hour, but Castiel knew within the first 10 minutes that they were negotiating the terms of an ending rather than planning a new beginning. Elena wanted space, time, and freedom to explore who she might be without the responsibilities of marriage. Castiel wanted a partner who saw those responsibilities as opportunities for growth rather than limitations to escape. They were, he realized, fundamentally incompatible in their vision of what marriage could and should be. Elena saw it as a constraint she needed periodic breaks from. Castiel saw it as a foundation for building something larger than either of them could create alone. By the end of their discussion, they had agreed that Elena would stay with her sister Maya for an indefinite period. They would maintain separate finances during this time and make decisions about their shared obligations as situations arose. It was, Castiel knew, divorce in everything but name. As Elena packed a suitcase later that morning, Castiel found himself watching her move through their bedroom like she was collecting evidence from a crime scene. She took clothes, toiletries, and her laptop, but left behind the photos on her nightstand, the books she had been reading, the small personal items that would have suggested she intended to return. "I'll call you in a few days," she said, standing in the doorway with her suitcase in hand. "Elena," Castiel said, and she turned back toward him. "When you're saving yourself, try to remember what you're saving yourself for. Because if it's not for the possibility of real love, real partnership, real connection with another person, then you might just be saving yourself for a life of beautiful isolation." She nodded, but didn't respond. A few minutes later, Castiel heard her car backing out of their driveway, and he was alone in the house they had bought together, furnished together, and planned to fill with children and decades of shared memories. The silence was different from the kind he had grown accustomed to during Elena's gradual withdrawal. This was the silence of actual absence, rather than emotional unavailability. Strangely, it felt more honest. 3 weeks into Elena's absence, Castiel discovered something unexpected. He slept better alone. Not because he was happy about the separation, but because the constant tension of sharing a bed with someone who felt like a stranger had been more exhausting than he realized. The guest room had become his sanctuary during the final months of their cohabitation, but now, sleeping in their king-size bed without Elena's restless energy beside him, he found a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The house felt different too. Not empty, exactly, but honest. For months, their home had carried the weight of unspoken resentments and carefully managed interactions. Now, it simply existed as a space where Castiel could think clearly without navigating the emotional minefield that conversations with Elena had become. Marcus noticed the change immediately when Castiel returned to work after taking a few personal days to process Elena's departure. "You look like someone who finally got a good night's sleep," Marcus observed, settling into his usual chair across from Castiel's desk with his morning coffee. "I did, actually. It's strange how much mental energy I was spending on trying to fix something that the other person didn't want fixed." Castiel pulled up the blueprints for their latest project, a mixed-use development that would combine retail space with residential units. The clean lines and logical structure of the building plans felt like a welcome contrast to the chaos his personal life had become. "Have you heard from Elena since she moved out?" 2 text messages. One asking if I could forward her mail to Maya's address, another asking if she left her good winter coat in the hall closet. Nothing about our relationship, nothing about whether she's gained any clarity about what she wants. It's like I've become a maintenance issue she's delegating to someone else. Marcus studied the blueprints spread across Castiel's desk, but his attention was clearly on the conversation rather than the architectural details. "My ex-wife did something similar during our separation. She treated me like a service provider rather than someone she had shared 15 years of her life with. It took me a while to realize that was actually valuable information about how she viewed our relationship." "What do you mean?" "I mean that people show you who they are through how they handle difficult situations. Sarah showed me that she saw our marriage as a series of transactions. When the transactions stopped benefiting her the way she wanted, she stopped participating while expecting me to keep providing services. Sounds familiar?" Castiel leaned back in his chair, considering this perspective. "Elena always said she felt like she lost herself in our marriage. But now I'm wondering if what she actually lost was the ability to take without giving. When we were dating, I was constantly pursuing her, constantly working to earn her attention and affection. Maybe what she misses isn't her independence, but having someone chase her while she stayed just out of reach. That's a hell of a realization. It explains why she seemed happiest during the early months of our relationship, when everything was uncertain and I was trying to prove myself worthy of her. Once we were married and I stopped treating her like a prize I might lose, she lost interest in the game. The conversation was interrupted by Castiel's phone buzzing with a text message. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment his heart rate increased with the familiar hope that she might be reaching out to actually discuss their relationship. Instead, the message read, "Maya's having a dinner party Saturday. She invited both of us. Thought you should know in case you want to avoid the awkwardness." Castiel showed the message to Marcus, who read it with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Even her invitations sound like she's managing you rather than communicating with you. Should I go? Do you want to see her? Castiel considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been an immediate yes. But sitting in his office, looking at the message that managed to be both an invitation and a dismissal, he realized his feelings had shifted in ways he hadn't expected. I want to see if the woman I married is still in there somewhere, or if this person who treats our relationship like a project management task is who Elena really is now.
Then go. But go with your eyes open, not your hopes up. Saturday evening found Castiel standing outside Maya's townhouse in the Riverside district, a trendy area filled with young professionals and couples who hadn't yet learned that granite countertops and stainless steel appliances don't automatically create happiness. Maya had always been Elena's closest confidant, the sister who provided validation for Elena's decisions without asking uncomfortable questions. The door opened before Castiel could knock, revealing Maya with a smile that seemed simultaneously welcoming and cautious. "Castiel, I'm so glad you decided to come. Elena wasn't sure you would." "Elena and I are separated, not enemies," Castiel replied, though even as he said it, he wondered if that distinction was becoming less clear. The townhouse was filled with the kind of people Elena had been gravitating toward in recent months: marketing professionals, tech entrepreneurs, and creative types who spoke in buzzwords about disruption and authenticity. Castiel recognized several faces from Elena's work events, people who had always seemed more interested in networking than genuine conversation. Elena was in the kitchen, arranging appetizers on a platter with the focused attention she had once directed toward their relationship. She looked up when Castiel entered, offering a smile that felt practiced rather than spontaneous. "You came," she said, as if his presence was both unexpected and slightly inconvenient. "Maya invited me, unless that was a mistake." "No, of course not. It's just—" Elena pranced around the kitchen, which had become crowded with other guests seeking drinks and food. "I wasn't sure how this would feel." "How does it feel?" Elena paused in her arrangement of the appetizers, considering the question with the same analytical approach she brought to her marketing campaigns. "Strange, like seeing someone I used to know really well in a context where we're both pretending to be different people." "I'm not pretending to be anyone, Elena. I'm the same person I was 3 weeks ago." "But the situation is different. We're different." Before Castiel could respond, Maya appeared at his elbow with a beer and an expression that suggested she was monitoring their interaction like a referee at a boxing match. "Castiel, you have to meet Derek. He just launched a startup that's revolutionizing sustainable packaging, right up your alley with all that environmental engineering stuff you're into." The evening proceeded with that particular type of social choreography that happens when everyone is aware of an elephant in the room but committed to discussing everything except its presence. Castiel found himself engaged in conversations about market trends, travel plans, and the latest streaming series while acutely aware of Elena's movements throughout the space. She was different here, more animated than she had been during their final months together. She laughed easily at jokes that weren't particularly funny, asked follow-up questions about people's work and hobbies, and generally displayed the kind of engaged social energy that Castiel hadn't seen directed toward him in over a year. "She seems happy," said a voice beside him.
Castiel turned to find Derek, the sustainable packaging entrepreneur who had been observing the same dynamic. "She does," Castiel agreed, though the word happy felt inadequate for what he was witnessing. Elena didn't just seem happy, she seemed liberated, as if removing herself from their marriage had freed her to become a more vivid version of herself. "Maya mentioned you two are taking some time apart. That must be difficult." Castiel studied Derek's face, trying to determine whether this was genuine sympathy or the kind of social fishing expedition that people sometimes disguised as concern. "It's clarifying," he said finally. "Clarifying how?" "Clarifying about what we each want from a relationship. Turns out we want different things." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I went through something similar last year. Sometimes people grow in different directions, and fighting that just makes everyone miserable." "Did you and your partner work it out?" "We realized we were trying to force compatibility that wasn't really there. Once we stopped fighting against reality, we both became much happier people. She's engaged to someone else now, and I'm genuinely happy for her." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter from the living room, where Elena was telling a story about a disastrous client presentation that had somehow turned into their most successful campaign. Castiel had heard this story before, but never told with such enthusiasm. Watching her now, he realized that Elena hadn't been saving herself from marriage in general, she had been saving herself from marriage to him specifically. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, it felt like a door opening. For months, Castiel had been trying to solve a puzzle that assumed Elena wanted to be married to him but had temporarily lost her way. What if the real puzzle was much simpler? What if Elena simply didn't want to be married to him and everything else was elaborate rationalization? Later in the evening, Castiel found himself alone with Elena on Maya's small balcony. The autumn air was crisp, and the city lights stretched out below them like scattered diamonds. It was the kind of romantic setting that would have meant something during the early years of their relationship. "Thank you for coming tonight," Elena said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool air. "I know this situation is weird for everyone." "It's not weird, Elena. It's honest, maybe for the first time in months." "What do you mean?" Castiel turned to face her fully, taking in the face he had once known better than his own. "Watching you tonight, I realized something. You're not struggling with who you are or what you want. You're exactly who you want to be, and you want to be that person without being married to me." Elena's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like relief. "Castiel, it's okay. Actually, it's better than okay. For months, I've been trying to figure out how to fix our relationship, how to help you find your way back to wanting to be my wife. But you don't want to be my wife. That's not a problem, Isolve. It's just a fact to accept." "It's not that simple." "Isn't it? Elena, when was the last time you looked at me the way you were looking at people tonight? When was the last time you told a story with that much energy when I was your audience? When was the last time you seemed genuinely happy to see me walk into a room?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her breath visible in the cool air. "That's not fair. Relationships are different from friendships. There's more pressure, more expectations." "There shouldn't be. The person you marry should be someone you're excited to see at the end of every day, not someone whose expectations feel like a burden." "I do love you, Castiel." "I believe that. But loving someone and wanting to be married to them are different things. You can love me and still not want to build a life with me. You can love me and still feel more like yourself when I'm not around." Elena leaned against the balcony railing, staring out at the city lights. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we should stop calling this a trial separation and start calling it what it really is." "Which is?" "The end of our marriage. Not because either of us is a bad person, but because we're not right for each other in the way that married people need to be right for each other." The words hung between them in the cool air, and Castiel felt a strange sense of peace as he spoke them. For months, he had been afraid of this conclusion, fighting against it even as the evidence mounted. Now, saying it out loud felt like finally exhaling after holding his breath for too long. "I'm not ready for that conversation," Elena said quietly. "I know, but I am. Elena, I deserve to be married to someone who chooses me every day, not someone who needs space from me to remember who she is. And you deserve to be with someone who enhances your life instead of complicating it. You think I complicate your life? I think we complicate each other's lives in ways that don't serve either of us. We're not bringing out the best in each other anymore. We haven't for a long time. Elena turned to look at him directly for the first time since they had stepped onto the balcony. So, what happens now? Now we stop pretending this is temporary. We file the papers, divide our assets, and start building the lives we actually want, instead of trying to salvage something that stopped working months ago. Just like that? Just like that. Elena, staying married to someone who would rather save herself from the marriage isn't good for either of us. You get to discover who you are when you're not worried about being a wife, and I get to find someone who actually wants to be one. They stood in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the dinner party drifting through the sliding glass door behind them. Castiel felt lighter than he had in months, as if speaking the truth had physically removed weight from his shoulders. "I should go," he said finally. "Thank Maya for dinner." "Castiel, wait." Elena reached out and touched his arm, the first voluntary physical contact they had shared since she moved out. "I'm sorry for how I handled everything, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You don't need to apologize for not wanting to be married to me. You just need to be honest about it. I was honest. I told you I needed space. You told me you needed space to figure things out, but you already knew what you wanted. You wanted out. The space was just a way of avoiding saying that directly." Elena's hand dropped from his arm. "Maybe you're right. I am right. And that's okay. Elena, I hope you find exactly what you're looking for. I hope you build a life that makes you feel as alive as you seem tonight. I just hope you understand that life doesn't include being married to me." Castiel kissed Elena's cheek, a gesture that felt more like saying goodbye to a friend than to a wife, and walked back through the townhouse. He thanked Maya for dinner, made polite goodbyes to the other guests, and stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling like a man who had just solved a problem that had been consuming his life for months. The drive home gave him time to process what had just happened. For the first time since Elena had moved out, he felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Not because he was looking forward to being divorced, but because he was looking forward to being honest about what he wanted and finding someone who wanted the same things. His phone buzzed with a text message as he pulled into his driveway. Elena's name appeared on the screen. "Thank you for tonight. You're right about everything. We should talk about next steps soon." Castiel read the message twice, then put his phone away without responding. There would be time for logistical conversations about lawyers and paperwork. Tonight, he wanted to sit in his house that no longer felt like a museum of failed expectations and think about what he wanted his life to look like moving forward. The next morning brought an unexpected sense of energy. Castiel woke early, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. But instead of dwelling on the past, he found himself writing about the future. What kind of partner did he want to find? What kind of relationship did he want to build? What have he learned about himself during the slow dissolution of his marriage? The answers came more easily than he expected. He wanted someone who chose him enthusiastically rather than reluctantly. He wanted someone who saw marriage as an opportunity for growth rather than a limitation on freedom. He wanted someone who brought energy to their relationship instead of conserving it for other priorities. Most importantly, he wanted someone who understood that love was not something you saved yourself from, but something you saved yourself for. Marcus arrived at the office that Monday morning to find Castiel already at his desk, working on the structural calculations for their mixed-use development with focused intensity. "You look different," Marcus observed. "Did something happen over the weekend?" "I had dinner at Maya's place. Elena was there." "How did that go?" "I told her we should stop pretending our separation is temporary and file for divorce." Marcus raised his eyebrows. How did she take that? "Better than I expected. I think she was relieved that one of us finally said what we were both thinking." "How are you feeling about it?"
Castiel leaned back in his chair, considering the question. Sad about losing what we used to have, but relieved to stop trying to resurrect something that was already dead. Elena spent months telling me she needed to save herself. I finally realized she was right, and that saving herself meant not being married to me. That's a mature way to look at it. It's the only way to look at it that doesn't drive you crazy. Marcus, I spent months thinking I could love Elena back into wanting to be my wife. But you can't love someone into choosing you. They either choose you or they don't. What's next? I find a good divorce attorney, and then I start figuring out what I want my life to look like as a single man. For the first time in years, I'm actually looking forward to finding out. The conversation was interrupted by Castiel's phone ringing. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. But they would need to have practical conversations about ending their marriage, and delaying them wouldn't serve anyone. Hello, Elena. Hi, do you have a few minutes to talk? I've been thinking about what you said last night. I have a few minutes. I called a lawyer this morning, just to understand what the process looks like. She said we could probably handle everything through mediation since we don't have children and our finances aren't too complicated. That sounds reasonable. She also said we should think about how we want to handle telling people, our families, our friends, people at work. Elena, we're adults ending a marriage that stopped working. We don't need to manage other people's reactions to that. I know, but I want to make sure we're telling the same story.
The story is simple. We grew apart, we want different things, and we decided it was better to end our marriage honestly than to keep pretending it was working. That's it. That's it. Elena, we don't owe anyone a detailed explanation of why our relationship failed. We especially don't owe anyone a story that makes this seem more complicated than it is. Elena was quiet for a moment. You make it sound so straightforward. It is straightforward. We're two people who discovered we're not compatible in the way that married people need to be compatible. There's no villain in this story, no one to blame. Sometimes people just aren't right for each other, and it takes time to figure that out. I guess I expected more drama. Castiel smiled despite himself. Drama would require us both to be more invested in the outcome than we actually are. You want to not be married to me, and I want to not be married to someone who doesn't want to be married to me. We're both getting what we want. When you put it that way, it almost sounds like a happy ending. Maybe it is. Elena, I hope you find exactly what you're looking for. I hope you build a life that makes you feel as alive and engaged as you seemed at Maya's dinner party. You deserve that. Thank you. And Castiel, I hope you find someone who appreciates what a good husband you were trying to be. I hope I find someone who wants me to be their husband, not someone who feels like I'm trying too hard. After Elena hung up, Castiel sat in his office, staring out at the construction site across the street. The foundation for the new building was nearly complete, and workers were beginning to frame the first floor. It struck him that ending his marriage was similar to construction work. Sometimes you had to tear down a structure that wasn't sound before you could build something better in its place. The next few weeks passed with the surreal efficiency of two people who had finally stopped fighting against reality. Elena and Castiel met with a mediator, divided their assets with minimal conflict, and agreed on terms that seemed fair to both parties. Elena would keep the house temporarily while looking for a place of her own, and Castiel would find an apartment and take most of the furniture he had brought to their marriage. The most difficult part was not the legal proceedings or the financial arrangements, but the gradual process of untangling their shared life. Castiel found himself packing boxes of books they had bought together, kitchen gadgets they had registered for as wedding gifts, and photographs from trips that now felt like evidence from someone else's life. "This is weird," Elena said one afternoon when she stopped by to collect more of her belongings while Castiel was packing. "Going through our stuff like we're liquidating a business." "In some ways, that's exactly what we're doing," Castiel replied, wrapping their wedding china in newspaper. "Marriage is a kind of partnership, and we're dissolving the partnership." "Did you ever think it would end like this?" Castiel considered the question seriously. "Honestly, no. When I married you, I thought we would figure out how to grow together instead of growing apart. But people change, and sometimes they change in directions that make them incompatible.
Do you regret marrying me? No. I regret that we weren't able to make it work, but I don't regret trying. Elena, we had some really good years together. The fact that it didn't last forever doesn't erase that. Elena picked up a framed photo from their honeymoon in Costa Rica, studying it with the detached interest of someone examining historical artifacts. We look so happy here. We were happy. We were also different people then. You were excited about building a life together, and I was excited about building it with you. Now you're excited about building a life alone, and I'm excited about finding someone who wants to build a life together. It really is that simple for you, isn't it? It has to be. Elena, the alternative is spending years being bitter about something that was never going to work anyway. I'd rather use that energy to build something better. 3 months after Elena had first announced she was saving herself, Castiel signed the final divorce papers in his lawyer's office. The process had taken longer than expected due to scheduling conflicts and paperwork delays, but the emotional work had been completed weeks earlier. By the time he walked out of the lawyer's office as a legally single man, it felt like a formality rather than a life-changing event. That evening, Marcus insisted on taking Castiel out for drinks to mark the occasion. They ended up at O'Malley's, a neighborhood bar that served decent food and attracted a crowd of professionals unwinding after work. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, raising his beer in a toast. "To officially be a free man?" "It feels honest," Castiel replied, clinking his bottle against Marcus's. "For the first time in over a year, my legal status matches my emotional reality." "Any regrets? About ending my marriage? No. About how long it took me to recognize that it needed to end? Maybe. I think both Elena and I would have been happier if we had faced the truth 6 months sooner. What's next?" Castiel looked around the bar, taking in the mix of couples and singles, people at various stages of their romantic lives. "Next, I figure out what I learned from being married to someone who was fundamentally incompatible with married life, and I use that knowledge to make better choices. Such as paying attention to whether someone actually wants to be in a relationship with me, not just whether they're willing to tolerate being in a relationship with me. Such as recognizing the difference between someone who's going through a rough patch and someone who's fundamentally opposed to the level of emotional intimacy that marriage requires." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Those are hard-won lessons." "They are, but they're valuable ones. Marcus, I spent 2 years trying to convince Elena to want what I wanted. I'm never doing that again. Next time, I'm going to find someone who already wants what I want." "And what do you want?" Castiel smiled, feeling more certain about the answer than he had in years. "I want a partner who chooses me every day. I want someone who sees our relationship as something to nurture rather than something to manage or escape from. I want someone who understands that saving yourself for love is different from saving yourself from love." That doesn't sound like too much to ask. It's not. Elena made me think it was by treating basic relationship maintenance like unreasonable demands. But wanting your spouse to actually want to be married to you isn't asking too much. It's asking for the minimum requirement of a healthy marriage. As they finished their drinks and prepared to leave, Marcus clapped Castiel on the shoulder. "You know what I think? I think Elena did you a favor by being so clear about not wanting to be married to you. Imagine if she had been just ambivalent enough to keep you guessing for another 5 years." Castiel laughed, realizing that Marcus was absolutely right. "In that case, I should probably send her a thank you card. Thanks for saving yourself from our marriage so efficiently. It saved me years of wondering what I did wrong." Now that's the kind of gratitude that shows real personal growth. Walking to his car that night, Castiel felt lighter than he had since before Elena first announced she was saving herself. The woman who had spent months treating their marriage like a burden she needed periodic breaks from was now free to discover exactly what she had been saving herself for. And Castiel was free to find someone who understood that the best relationships don't require you to save yourself from them, but rather to save yourself for them. 6 months after his divorce was finalized, Castiel found himself in an unexpected place, genuinely content with his single life. He had moved into a modern apartment complex called Sunset Gardens, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a small lake, and the building's amenities included a fitness center he actually used.
The space was entirely his own, decorated with furniture he had chosen rather than compromised on, filled with books he wanted to read and music he enjoyed listening to. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been evenings when the silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful, weekends when he missed having someone to share small discoveries with, moments when he questioned whether he had given up too easily on his marriage. But those moments became less frequent as he rediscovered who he was when he wasn't constantly trying to decode someone else's moods or manage someone else's emotional distance. Marcus had warned him about the rebound temptation, the urge to immediately fill the void left by Elena with someone new. Take time to remember what you actually want, Marcus had advised. Don't just find someone who's the opposite of Elena, find someone who's right for you. The advice had proven wise. Castiel had gone on a few casual dates, coffee meetings arranged through mutual friends or dating apps, but none had developed into anything serious. He was learning to distinguish between loneliness and genuine interest, between wanting companionship and wanting a specific person's companionship. His work at Rivera Construction had become more engaging than ever. Without the constant background stress of a deteriorating marriage, Castiel found himself approaching projects with renewed creativity and focus. He had recently been promoted to senior project manager, a role that involved more client interaction and strategic planning. The promotion felt like validation that removing dysfunction from his personal life had improved his professional performance as well. "You seem different these days," observed Carmen Rivera, the company's founder and Castiel's new direct supervisor. They were walking through the construction site of a sustainable housing development, reviewing progress on the project that would serve as Castiel's first major assignment in his new role. "More confident, maybe, more decisive." "I feel more like myself," Castiel replied, studying the foundation work that would support 24 energy-efficient townhomes. "I spent a couple of years feeling like I was constantly trying to solve problems that the other person didn't want solved. It's refreshing to work on problems that people actually want fixed." Carmen laughed. "Are we talking about construction or marriage?" "Both, actually. Turns out the skills are pretty similar. You need willing participants, clear communication, and everyone has to be committed to the same end goal." The conversation was interrupted by Castiel's phone buzzing with a text message. He glanced at the screen, expecting to see a message from Marcus or one of the subcontractors, but instead found a name he hadn't seen in months: Elena. "Heard about your promotion through Maya. Congratulations. You deserve it." Castiel showed the message to Carmen, who read it with the bemused expression of someone watching a minor curiosity. "Ex-wife?" "Ex-wife. First time she's contacted me since the divorce was finalized." "How does that feel?" Castiel considered the question as he put his phone away without responding to Elena's message. "Like hearing from an old coworker I used to have conflicts with. Polite, but not particularly relevant to my current life." "That's probably healthy." "It is. Elena was a significant part of my life for 5 years, but she made it clear that she wanted to save herself from being part of my life. I learned to respect that decision." The rest of the week passed with the steady rhythm that Castiel had grown to appreciate. Work projects that challenged him intellectually, evening workouts that cleared his mind, weekends that he filled with activities he genuinely enjoyed rather than obligations he felt pressured to fulfill. He had rediscovered his love of hiking, often spending Saturday mornings on the trails that wound through the mountains outside San Miguel. The physical exertion and natural beauty provided a kind of meditation that helped him process the changes in his life. It was on one of these Saturday hikes that Castiel met Dr. Sofia Alvarez. She was sitting on a boulder near the summit of Pine Ridge Trail, eating an apple and reading a paperback novel, her hiking boots propped up on a smaller rock. Something about the scene struck him as perfectly composed, like a photograph titled "Woman Who Knows How to Be Alone." "Good book?" Castiel asked as he approached, gesturing toward the novel in her hands. Sophia looked up, revealing intelligent dark eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely pleased by the interruption rather than merely polite. "Excellent book, actually. Historical fiction about a woman who builds bridges in 1920s Chicago. Very satisfying protagonist who solves problems through competence rather than luck." "Competence is an underrated quality in protagonists," Castiel replied, "and in people generally." "Agreed. I'm Sophia, by the way, and you look like someone who also appreciates competence." "Castiel, what makes you say that?" Your hiking gear is well maintained but not obsessively new, which suggests you actually use it regularly rather than buying it to look outdoorsy. Your pace coming up the trail was steady rather than rushed, which suggests you understand endurance. And you asked about my book rather than commenting on the view, which suggests you're more interested in what people think than what they look like. Castiel found himself genuinely impressed by her observational skills. What do you do for a living, if you don't mind me asking? I'm a pediatric surgeon at General Hospital. Occupational hazard of my profession is learning to read people quickly and accurately. What about you? Structural engineer, different kind of problem solving, but similar attention to detail. They ended up hiking down the mountain together, their conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of two people who shared similar ways of approaching the world. Sophia was funny without trying too hard, intelligent without being condescending, and comfortable with silence when conversation wasn't necessary. By the time they reached the parking area, Castiel realized he hadn't thought about Elena or their failed marriage once during the entire 3-hour descent. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" he asked as they reached their cars. "I promised to ask about whatever book you're reading next." "I'd like that," Sophia replied, pulling a business card from her hiking pack with practiced efficiency. "Fair warning, I work long hours, and I'm not particularly interested in drama or games. If that sounds boring to you, now would be a good time to politely decline." "That sounds perfect to me," Castiel said. "I've had enough drama to last several lifetimes." Their first official date took place 3 weeks later at a small cafe near the hospital where Sophia worked. She had just finished a 12-hour surgery and looked tired but satisfied, the way people look when they've accomplished something meaningful. Castiel found her dedication to her work attractive rather than threatening, a stark contrast to how Elena's career ambitions had always felt like competition for her attention. "Tell me about the most interesting building you've ever worked on," Sophia said after they had ordered coffee and settled into a corner booth. For the next hour, Castiel found himself describing projects he had worked on, challenges he had solved, and innovations he was excited about implementing in future designs. Sophia listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated she was actually processing what he was saying rather than simply waiting for her turn to talk. "Your turn," Castiel said eventually. "What's the most challenging surgery you've performed?" Sophia's eyes lit up as she described a complex procedure she had recently completed on a 6-year-old with a rare heart defect. Her passion for her work was evident in every word, but she also spoke with the kind of humility that comes from understanding both your capabilities and your limitations. "Do you want children someday?" Castiel asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal for a first date. "I do," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Working with kids all day has only reinforced that desire. What about you?" "I thought I did, but my ex-wife was never ready to have that conversation."
Now I'm realizing that I want children with the right person, not just children in general. That's a mature distinction. What happened with your ex-wife, if you don't mind me asking? Castiel appreciated that Sophia asked directly, rather than trying to extract the information through indirect questions. She decided she needed to save herself from our marriage. Turned out she was right, just not in the way she intended. How so? She thought she needed to save herself from the constraints of being married. I eventually realized she needed to save herself from being married to someone who wanted a real partnership. We wanted fundamentally different things. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. It's better to figure that out sooner rather than later, even if it's painful. Exactly. Elena wasn't a bad person, but she was a bad fit for the kind of marriage I wanted. Recognizing that difference probably saved us both years of frustration. As their relationship developed over the following months, Castiel discovered what it felt like to be with someone who actively chose him rather than simply tolerating his presence. Sophia made time for him in her demanding schedule not because she felt obligated, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. She brought energy to their relationship rather than conserving it for other priorities. Most importantly, she seemed to understand intuitively that loving someone meant adding value to their life rather than creating complications they needed to manage. "I like how easy this feels," Sophia said one evening as they cooked dinner together in Castiel's apartment. They had developed a comfortable routine where she would arrive after her shift at the hospital and they would prepare meals together while discussing their respective days. Not easy like it doesn't require effort, but easy like we're both working toward the same goal.
That's exactly what it should feel like, Castiel replied, watching her efficiently dice vegetables with the precision of someone accustomed to working with her hands. I spent years thinking that relationships were supposed to be difficult, that constant work was a sign of deep commitment. Now I think that was just evidence of fundamental incompatibility. Relationships should enhance your life, not complicate it, Sophia agreed. They require effort, but it should be the kind of effort that feels worthwhile rather than exhausting. 6 months into their relationship, Castiel received an unexpected phone call from Maya, Elena's sister. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out over caution. "Castiel, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Elena. What can I do for you, Maya?" "I wanted to thank you, actually, for how you handled the divorce. You could have made things much more difficult than you did. There was no point in being vindictive. Elena and I just weren't right for each other. She realizes that now. She's been in therapy, working through some things. She asked me to tell you that she understands why you couldn't wait around while she figured herself out." Castiel felt a mixture of vindication and sadness at this news. "How is she doing?" "Better, I think. She's dating someone new, a guy who seems better suited to her personality. Someone who enjoys the independence thing as much as she does. I'm glad she found what she was looking for. She said to tell you that she hopes you found someone who appreciates what a good partner you were trying to be." "I did, actually. Her name is Sophia, and she's a pediatric surgeon. We're very happy together." "That's wonderful. Elena will be glad to hear that." After Maya hung up, Castiel reflected on how different his life had become in the 18 months since Elena first announced she was saving herself. He had gone from being married to someone who treated his desire for closeness as a burden, to being single and content, to being in a relationship with someone who shared his vision of what partnership could look like. The transformation hadn't required him to change his fundamental nature or lower his expectations. Instead, it had required him to stop accepting treatment that fell short of what he deserved, and to recognize the difference between someone who was temporarily struggling and someone who was fundamentally incompatible with commitment. "How was your day?" Sophia asked that evening when she arrived at his apartment after a particularly long surgery. "Good, actually. Elena's sister called to say that Elena's doing well and found someone who suits her better." "How do you feel about that?" "Happy for her, mostly, and grateful that we both had the courage to end something that wasn't working instead of spending years trying to force compatibility that wasn't there." Sophia kissed him gently, a gesture that felt both casual and meaningful. "That's very mature of you. It's very honest of me. Elena was never going to be the kind of partner I needed, and I was never going to be the kind of husband she wanted. Accepting that reality freed us both to find people who were actually right for us." "Speaking of which," Sophia said, settling beside him on the couch with the kind of natural ease that suggested she belonged there, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "My lease is up next month, and I've been looking at new places. I found a house with a great kitchen and a yard that would be perfect for the garden I've been wanting to start." "That sounds wonderful. It's also a lot of space for one person. I was wondering if you might be interested in looking at it with me. Not as a proposal or anything dramatic, just as two people who enjoy living together and might want to make that arrangement more official." Castiel felt his heart rate increase, not with anxiety, but with excitement. The idea of sharing a home with Sophia felt natural rather than complicated, like a logical next step rather than a risky leap. "I would love to look at it with you," he said, "with one condition." "What's that?" "Promise me that if you ever need to save yourself from something, you'll save yourself towards something better, rather than just away from what you have." Sophia laughed, understanding the reference immediately. "I promise. And I promise that what I'm saving myself for is a life with someone who enhances it rather than complicates it. In that case, let's go look at your house." As they began planning their future together, Castiel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Elena's declaration that she was saving herself had initially felt like a rejection of everything they had built together. In retrospect, it had been the beginning of both of them discovering what they actually wanted from life and love. Elena had saved herself for independence and the kind of relationship that allowed her to maintain that independence. Castiel had discovered that he was saving herself for partnership with someone who understood that love was not something you needed protection from, but something you chose to build together every day. The difference, he realized, was not just in what they were saving themselves for, but in their fundamental understanding of what love could and should be. Elena saw love as potentially limiting, something that required careful management to prevent it from overwhelming her individual identity. Castiel saw love as potentially liberating, something that could make both people more than they could be alone. Neither perspective was inherently wrong, but they were incompatible with each other. The tragedy would have been spending years trying to force compatibility rather than accepting their differences and finding people who shared their respective visions. Now, planning a future with Sophia, Castiel understood that the best relationships didn't require you to save yourself from them. They invited you to save yourself for them, to become the best version of yourself in service of something larger and more meaningful than individual happiness alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.